Hello everyone and welcome you to the Dead Space Iceberg breakdown. Dead Space is one of my favorite game franchises, and with the Dead Space remake coming out later this month, I really got into the mood, and after finding this Iceberg made by noisybracken and making some changes to it, I bring you this. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's just dive right in. Dead Space Extraction is a rail shooter prequel to Dead Space released for the Wii in 2009 and for the PlayStation 3 in 2011. Here's the official description of the game from Electronic Arts. Dead Space Extraction tells the untold story of the IG-7 colony through a handful of survivors battling to reach the orbiting USG Ishimura amidst a horrific infection. As their allies mysteriously fall victim to dementia, it becomes clear that protecting a young girl granting them a bizarre immunity may be their only hope for survival. There are two Dead Space comics, Dead Space and Dead Space Extraction. Yes, they are called the same as the games because they are tie-in comics. As for books, you've got Dead Space Martyr, Dead Space Salvage, Dead Space Catalyst, and Dead Space Liberation. I won't get into them since some of the interesting stuff is mentioned later down in the Iceberg, but if you enjoy Dead Space, it's more Dead Space, so you should go check them out. There are two Dead Space movies, Dead Space Downfall and Dead Space Aftermath. Dead Space Downfall was released in 2008, and it's a prequel to the events of the first Dead Space game, taking place during the events of Extraction. Dead Space Aftermath, on the other hand, was released in 2011, and it shows you what happened after the events of the first game, taking place in the USG O'Bannon sent to IG-7 to recover some of Marker's 3A's fragments. No, Isaac is in mute, however he does not speak throughout the first game. Visceral Games felt that it would be better if he didn't speak, sort of how Gordon Freeman doesn't speak so you feel more so in his shoes instead of you playing as someone else. Some people have tried to give an in-universe reason as to why Isaac doesn't speak. The best one I found is that his communicator might be broken, so he's only able to receive transmissions rather than send them out. Another reason I heard is that he's traumatized, which, sure, I guess is a good reason, but a lot of shit happens throughout the second and third games, and he speaks plenty throughout those, so yeah, if I had to give an in-universe reason, the best one is the communicator one.
Mr. Clark, I really must speak with you. I'm very close to your position, and I know you want to hear what I have to say. I can explain all this. So what happened? When you have the nav cards, I'll let you into the security station. We must talk. Hurry.
Isaac is an engineer for the Concordas Construction Corporation, also known as the CEC. The CEC, in case you didn't know, is a public trading company responsible for the creation of planet cracking and the first company to develop deep space mining. Which basically means resources were running low on Earth, so they decided to look for them in other planets. I think it's crazy how much they tell you throughout the games that to beat the necromorphs you gotta cut off their limbs. In the first game, at the beginning of it, they tell you 3 times in a row, and in the second game, it sort of happens the same way, however it's more like making fun of it in the second game because Isaac already knows that you have to do that. But yeah, they tell you a lot throughout the games, and that's the way you beat them.
Isaac, be careful. Shooting them in the body didn't seem to work. Go for the limbs. Dismember them. That should do the job.
Conserve ammo by dismembering enemy limbs and doing extra damage.
The Earth Government Colonial Alliance, also known just as EarthGov, is the organization in charge of administration of the territories that are under its control. Most notable member that you meet from EarthGov during the games is Kendra Daniels from the first game. EarthGov is basically a totalitarian state, having complete control of the colonies and trying to neutralize unitology. Excluding stuff like the pulse rifle, all the weapons in the first game are actually tools. The tutorial section of Extraction is a showcase of the weapons you're gonna use throughout the game being used for the intended purpose. For example, the plasma cutter is not a fancy name for a weapon, it's just a plasma cutter. The flamethrower is also used to melt the ice of comets. So the markers are what I would consider the main antagonistic force of the game, considering they are the ones in charge of making the necromorphs. I'm not gonna go too into them right now, considering the fact that on each tier of the iceberg, there's like at least one entry about the markers. So yeah, if you want to know all about the markers, just stick around. The plasma cutter is probably the most famous and most easily recognizable weapon of the whole Dead Space franchise. It's the first weapon you get in every game, and you can go through the whole game without using any other weapon. As the name would suggest, it's just very good at cutting off necromorph limbs. So the games about surviving a monster outbreak have death animations. Shocking, I know. But what this entry refers to is the fact that there are a lot of them, and are sort of a selling point of the franchise in my opinion. The first one that comes to mind is what happens if you screw up the eye machine section of the second game. There's not much I can say about this entry, to be honest. All of the games take place in the future, and the first one takes place in the year 2508. EG7 is the planet where the man-made marker 3A resides and where the ending of the first Dead Space takes place. It's also the planet you see the Shimura was mining at the beginning of the first game.
Deep space mining is a lucrative business, Ms. Daniels. EG7 is a gold mine according to prospectors' reports. Cobalt, silicon, osmium.
Unitology is a religion founded based on the discoveries of Michael Landman, the man who found the first marker on Earth. Unitologists believe that humans were created by aliens and that they would be reunified with them after death through the markers. As mentioned earlier, since markers are sort of antagonists of the game, Unitologists are as well. The USG Ishimura is the first Planet Cracker ship built by the CEC and is the main setting for the first Dead Space game. It is also like a really big ship, longer than a mile actually.
So that's Ishimura.
The USG Ishimura. Biggest planet cracker in her class. And it looks like they already popped the cork.
Nicole Brenner was Isaac Clarke's girlfriend and a medical officer aboard the USG Ishimura. After her death during a necromorph outbreak, you start seeing hallucinations of her caused on Isaac by the markers. She also shows up during the second game, with Isaac fighting her as the final boss of the game to destroy a marker. There are actually two types of markers, black ones and red ones. The black markers are the original ones, like the one that crash landed on Earth, then discovered in 2214 by a group of scientists, and red ones are the copies of the black ones. There's no difference as to what markers do depending on if they are black or red, the only difference is their origin.
Cargo shipment 782.
So the markers actually broadcast a highly concentrated electromagnetic signal that leads to a form of dementia in humans and other advanced enough species. This dementia manifests itself as hallucinations like the ones mentioned before. The goal of the dementia is to cause the people to commit unalive to prepare them for the necromorph infection. In case of people like Isaac Clarke, however, this dementia reveals blueprints for the creation of red markers, and the hallucinations are guiding them to achieve certain goals for the markers rather than to their death, such as is the case with the Nicole hallucinations. Like mentioned before, talking about the Nicole hallucinations, Nicole is dead before the events of the first game even begin. This entry might be related to other thing that gets mentioned in an upcoming tier, so I'll save that other thing for later. So Dead Space doesn't have a traditional HUD. Instead, elements like your health, stasis charge, and oxygen are displayed in the back of your suit. Ammunition is displayed on the weapon themselves, and your inventory is actually a hologram that comes from your suit. Elements that are necessary for gameplay are smartly implemented into the environment and on your equipment. During the 6th chapter of the second game, as you make your way through a daycare center, you'll be greeted by this. Yes, a cardboard sun falls from the ceiling right in front of you. To be honest, it's one of the scariest jump scares of the whole game alongside an alarm clock. Dead Space Ignition is a horror action puzzle game developed by Megatube, Visceral Games, and Sumo Digital, released in 2010 for the Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network. The game is a prequel to Dead Space 2, and you follow Franco Delisle, a technician in the Sprawl, as he tries to survive the necromorph outbreak. The game has branching paths and consists of different types of minigames. It is revealed through some dialogue from the second game that Nicole was actually encouraged by Isaac to get on board the Shimura. This refers to Robert Norton from the third game and how both the community and the characters in games hate him because he's a douchebag. Makes you wonder what Ellie saw in him, to be honest.
She doesn't love you!
Titan Station, also known as the Sprawl, is the space station that Dead Space 2 takes place in. It's a station built on one of Saturn's moons, where the first planet crack happened. After the events of the first game, Isaac Clarke and some of Marker 3A's fragments were taken to this station. Tau Volantis is the planet where a big part of Dead Space 3 takes place in. The planet is a frozen wasteland because of a certain event that will be mentioned later in the Iceberg. The Conversions event is the final process of a marker to turn into a Breathen Moon. The conversions happens when a large amount of organic matter infected with the necromorph pathogen accumulates. Basically, when necromorphs get grouped up around the marker. The conversions can be stopped by destroying the marker that started it, or by destroying the incomplete Breathen Moon.
What? What are they doing?
They're all coming to the marker. Convergence is at hand.
So, earlier on in its development, Dead Space was a completely different game, because it was actually System Shock 3. As you know, System Shock 3 didn't come out from Visceral Games, so what happened? Resident Evil 4 happened. So yeah, the team behind Dead Space was so impressed by Resident Evil 4 that they decided to change the whole game. They weren't sure if they could convince Electronic Arts into working on an original idea instead of System Shock 3, but thanks to Glenn Schofield showing progress and building confidence, EA gave the project a thumbs up. You can also tell how the team felt more confident about making Dead Space rather than System Shock 3 since, well, making a sequel to a game when you're not the studio that made the others is kind of a scary task to take on. For anyone that's familiar with Visceral Games, it's no surprise that Electronic Arts really screwed Dead Space 3 up with it being the weakest installment in the franchise. Even if Dead Space 2 was a very well received game, it didn't do so well financially because of the game's very high development budget. So, as Visceral was developing the third installment, Electronic Arts would approach them and make them do key changes to the game, such as adding co-op to it, and stuff to make the game faster. Turning into a Breathen Moon is the ultimate goal of the markers. With the conversions, they get enough biomass to turn into it. Thanks to straws stabbing Ellie's eye between games, Ellie bought an artificial light to replace it. However, she was unable to find one that matched her original eye color. This refers to the giant alien machine in Tau Volantis that is hidden beneath a mountain. The machine was built to stop the conversions event caused by the hundreds of red markers in Tau Volantis. The machine was unable to completely stop the conversions, but it was able to pause it, although it was able to do so with catastrophic results. It's not exactly that Isaac built the red marker himself, but the marker you destroy at the end of the second game was built using the information stored in Isaac's mind. I'm not too sure about this one, to be honest. Markers feel like they make decisions because of how it battles Isaac at the end of the second game, for example, so I guess it's fair to say that the markers do have some sentience. However, it is never confirmed if this is because of the markers themselves or it's maybe the Breathen Moons acting through the markers. Octavia Clarke, Isaac's mom, found solace in the Church of Unitology after her husband was away for extended periods of time, which caused Octavia to be depressed. Gunnar Wright is the voice actor that portrays Isaac Clarke in the second and third game, and he will also portray him in the Dead Space 1 remake. When you open up Dead Space 2, you'll notice that there's some marker fragments floating around in the main menu. However, by the end of the game, they will turn into a complete marker. At one point during Dead Space 2's second chapter, you can buy a bunch of washing machines, with one shaking violently as you hear a baby crying from inside it. I guess someone put their baby inside a washing machine as a last-ditch effort to save it from the necromorph outbreak. However, as the light goes out, the crying stops. This is the other entry I was referring to when talking about Nicole is dead earlier. If you take the first letter of each Dead Space chapter, the message Nicole is dead will reveal itself. The other games aside from Dead Space 2 also do this. Dead Space 3 chapters spelled out Brother Moons are awake. Dead Space Extraction spells War and Lies, and Dead Space Mobile spells He will betray. You can find a shooting range minigame inside the USM Valor during Chapter 9 of the first game. As you get through the levels of it, you start getting better and better rewards, with the last reward being a power node. This is referring to Dead Space 3 only, in which none of the main cast of characters die to a necromorph. Rosen and Locke die on the way to Tau Volantis, Buckle dies to hypothermia, Santos dies falling off a cliff, Danik dies as the conversion starts up again, and Norton is killed by Isaac. Between the second and third game, Isaac and Ellie start and end a relationship. Ellie leaves Isaac because he's unable to move on from what had happened to him in the first and second game. Not much to say about this one. Isaac is 49 years old, although he's physically 47 because of the stasis containment he was kept in after the first game. In Dead Space 2 and 3, you can turn on classic gaming, which means that instead of just having a reticle in the middle of the screen, which kinda sucks to be honest, the laser from your gun actually show where your shots will hit, like in the first game. Michael Altman was a member of the scientist team that discovered the black marker that resided on Earth. He noticed the marker was causing violence and murder around him, while he remained unaffected because he was immune in the same way Isaac is. He then escaped the facility and announced the existence of the marker to the world in Washington, D.C. After this announcement, he's recaptured and witnesses a necromorph infection caused by a scientist injecting himself with a tissue sample found within the marker. After escaping the facility, again, Altman decides to go back and is able to destroy it to make sure the marker isn't found again. Sadly for him, he is recaptured once again and killed in a mysterious manner. After his death, Unitologists twist the truth and worship him as a martyr figure. The black marker discovered by Michael Altman and his team was one that crash-landed on Earth millions of years ago. Make us whole is a phrase you hear being said by Unitologists as well as people affected by the marker throughout all of the games. It's a phrase used by the markers to manipulate people into helping it with the conversions. Planet cracking is exactly what it sounds like. Ships like the Shimura would rip out part of a planet and mine valuable resources out of it. The CEC, as mentioned before, is the organization in charge of planet cracking. Their logo reflects this, as it looks like a nutcracker about to crack a nut. Another fun fact is that if you shine your flashlight on it aboard the Shimura, the logo will turn green, this being an authentication measure by the CEC. The alien inhabitants of Tau Volantis made a codex that, together with the machine mentioned earlier, would stop the conversions. They were unable to stop it permanently, but as the planet turned into a frozen wasteland, it halted the process, leaving the Breath and Moon semi-dormant. Remember how I said that the black marker of Earth landed on it millions of years ago? Well, it actually landed 65 million years ago off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. So yes, the asteroid that brought the black marker to Earth was the one that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. At the end of Dead Space 2, you fight off the marker's influence inside Isaac's head, which ends up destroying the marker. I wanna add to this, before the fight begins, Isaac gives one of the best lines out of the game and the franchise as a whole.
Fuck you! And fuck your marker!
As mentioned before, Isaac's mom was a member of the Church of Unitology, and she gave all her money to the church. This affected Isaac negatively, since he was forced to forego admission to a prominent engineering college due to a lack of finance. This obviously made Isaac hate the church. Altman was held as a martyr by Unitologists, but he didn't actually start the religion. It was started based on his discovery of the marker and the fact that he was the one that revealed this information to the world, but he himself is not related to the religion. If you finish Dead Space 2 on hardcore mode, you unlock the hand cannon, which, as the name of the sentry would suggest, it's a big red foam finger. The weapon does an absurd amount of damage and has infinite ammunition, and shooting it is a treat for the ears. If you look closely, you'll notice that Isaac aims the plasma cutter with only one hand. When you move, he does aim it with two hands though. There's a 3-year time skip between Dead Space 1 and 2, with some events in between being covered in comics and movies. But even if 3 years pass, Isaac does not age between the games. After he was rescued, he was placed in a stasis chamber, which stops you from aging. That's why earlier I mentioned Isaac is 49, but physically 47. The hacker suit is an unlockable outfit in Dead Space 2. It can be unlocked by having a save file from Dead Space Ignition in your console, and it is very similar to the initial suit that you see Isaac wear at the beginning of the third game. Dead Space 2 has a similar ending to the first game, but when Isaac turns around, instead of seeing Nicole and getting jump scared, he should see Sally.
What?
In the comic Dead Space Extraction, it is revealed that Isaac worked on the Shimura at an unspecified time. Isaac Clarke's name is a homage to two of the big three science fiction writers, Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. Because of the way Unitologists twisted truth about the fate that Altman met, it's kind of a mystery who exactly killed him. However, we know that Craig Markov and Stevens, military officers overseeing the Marker project, killed Altman to use his martyrdom to found the church and to extract the Marker information from his brain. During the ending chapter of Dead Space, it is revealed to the player that Nicole has been dead the whole time. However, the way it is revealed is via video that Isaac had access to since before the game began. So, did Isaac know that Nicole was dead? Well, yes, he did. Isaac has access to the whole video but doesn't watch it to completion until the end of the game where Kendra shows it to him. What happened is that Isaac repressed the ending of the video and just kept watching it right up to before the end.
I loved you. I always loved you.
During the first chapter of Dead Space 2, you'll find a scale that is functional. If you stand on it, it'll show you that Isaac weighs 195 pounds. If you come back to it later, after you unlock your suit, it'll show you that the armor weighs 60 pounds, making Isaac's total weight 255 pounds. Rock worshippers and Marker Head are some of the derogatory ways Unitology members are referred to. Unitology, as the name implies, is about unification, also hinting at the fact that the conversions process unifies bodies to form the Breath and Moon. The way you fight off necromorphs is by dismembering them, cutting off their limbs. The way you fight the enemies of the game actually goes against their whole ideology and goal. The Resource Wars were a series of conflicts fought years before the events of the first game even happened. They happened over the almost exhausted resources of Earth and the dwindling supplies of the colonies. After planet cracking was invented, however, conflicts started to be less and less until they officially ended by the year 2508. Tideman is the main antagonist of Dead Space 2. However, you can find a text log that reveals he was researching the markers to generate energy and keep money coming to Titan Station, as they were going to lose the station. He was trying not to lose Titan Station, but his choices ended up leading to its destruction. This entry aims to give an explanation to the Fermi paradox in the Dead Space universe. The Fermi paradox is the discrepancy between the lack of evidence of alien life and the high likelihood of its existence. So, in the Dead Space universe, the reason for this would be that the Breath and Moons got to those alien species, so we don't know of them. We get to tell Volantis in the games, but they are all dead. This entry is basically saying that the same fate was met by other alien species. So a lot of people like to think that Unitology is comparable to Scientology. However, for an interview, creative director for Dead Space 2, Wright Bagwell, had this to say. We never really approached that discussion with the intention of poking fun at a particular religion, or sort of making a social statement about something that's going on right now. For us, Unitology's purpose in the story represents people's illogical thinking about things they don't understand. It was never really intended to be a jab at any particular religion. I know people have said, oh yeah, it's a jab at Scientology. It was never really intended. I think people get that a lot because the name is very similar. So yeah, it was never intended to be a jab at any religion. It was just created for the story and that's it. The first Dead Space game had some pretty cool marketing with creepy and intriguing trailers leading up to the release of the new EP. I wonder how they decided to approach marketing for the second game.
Oh my god! Oh gosh. I think it'll make a person become insane.
This game is an atrocity. It's revolting. It's violent. It's everything you love in a game. And your mom's gonna hate it.
Why would they even make something like this?
Dead Space 2, rated M for mature.
Oh. Okay then. There is some stuff that you could compare between the Alien movies and the Dead Space games. Like, the first one is horror focused and the second one is more action focused, for example. But the one thing that's a bit more specific that I feel both share is the protagonist and some of the traits, such as they both survive an outbreak in a ship, Ripley was a warrant officer, Isaac an engineer, and they both later become sources of information for a big corporation. These next few entries are gonna be very short since it's just gonna be me mentioning a lot of Dead Space in our media. To start off, if you bought Dead Space 2 on release, you would get a code for a Dead Space armor for Dragon Age 2. You can also get Isaac's engineering suit in Dante's Inferno, which is a game also made by Visceral Games. If you enter the cheat code Dead Space 2 in Skate 3, you can unlock Isaac in his engineering suit and a custom skateboard. And last, but certainly not least, Isaac is one of the fighters you can play as in PlayStation All-Stars. This is basically a meme of the community because of how Isaac is always in sneaking around mode. Especially in the first game, Isaac is always leaned forward. He doesn't always stand like this, but since you're going around an infested ship or station filled with necromorphs, it makes sense for him to be in this sort of fight or flight posture. Since Isaac actively works against the goals of Unitologists, he's considered an infidel. Like, they worship the markers and you go on to destroy them, so yeah, they probably hate him even if they need him. The currency used in the Dead Space universe is called credits, which you loot in the form of credit chips in the first two games. However, in Dead Space 3, instead of being called credits, they are called ration seals. They work the same as credits do, but they got a different name because of the setting for the third game. If you start up a new Dead Space 2 game on PC, you may notice that you have a ton of suits and weapons unlocked at the beginning, most of them being stuff you'll find way later in the game, like the detonator, flamethrower, or security suit. Why do you start the game with all of this? Well, apparently a lot of the things were console exclusive stuff, but someone ended up data mining for PC, so Electronic Arts decided to just give it to everyone on PC. It kinda ruins new playthroughs since the items cover up all of the store and it's tedious to get rid of them. Just ignore the stuff that is free and your playthrough should be normal. This is obviously not true at all, but there's a lot of similarities between the necromorphs and the creatures from The Thing, as it was used for inspiration for the look of the necromorphs. I mean, they are both humans turned into monster creatures, and even some enemies have a similar look to forms The Thing takes. Also, funny thing, Sean Carpenter, the director of The Thing, said that he would love to direct a Dead Space film. EA, get to it. Give it to him. Carrie Norton, better known as Vandal, is the protagonist of Dead Space Mobile and the person responsible for the Titan Station outbreak. She had recently converted to the Church of Unitology, who sent her on a secret mission to the Sprawl. Unitologists tricked her into destroying certain station systems, where she was unknowingly releasing the necromorphs. Vandal ends up dead after her fight with a giant necromorph. So far, Carrie has been the only female protagonist in a third-person Dead Space game. This was not revealed until the end of the game, similarly to Super Metroid. She may or may not be related to Robert Nordon from the third game, since they share the same hair and eye color as well as the same last name. However, this may just be coincidences instead of evidence of them being related. The reason why people like Timeman want to build markers is because these pose as sources of infinite energy. They pose as this since any person would like this, especially when going through an event like the Resource Wars. I'm not sure if this entry is trying to imply something deeper or if it just refers to the fact that Isaac loses his head a lot and that's it. I never really noticed there being more decapitations than other deaths, considering he usually loses an arm or a leg at the same time in all of them. But he does lose his head a lot, that is true. This is the theory that the markers and Breath and Moons actually want to stop species from being too advanced. This ends up being a side effect of what markers do, but this is not their purpose. Breath and Moons have a single goal: consume all organic life. Not much to say about this one, to be honest, just that in some of the concept art the rig's color is actually green instead of blue. This is the chicken or the egg argument, but for the Dead Space universe. If Earth and moons make markers, but are born from markers, how was the first marker made? This could have possibly been answered if we ever got a fourth Dead Space, but as of now, we'll never know. The Oracles are believed to be high-ranking agents of EarthGov. They are dressed in all white and they make their first appearance in Dead Space Salvage. I would love to get more into them, but they are shrouded in mystery, acting like a sort of Men in Black of Dead Space. And as the last, but certainly not least entry of the iceberg, Dead Space is a science fiction horror movie released in 1991. It stars Mark Singer, Laura May Tate, and Bryan Cranston. The synopsis of the movie says as follows. Favon had been thought to be a safe and controlled research facility until a distress signal calls for Commander Krieger and his robot Tin Pen. Together, they try to save the planet from a spreading virus and an outgrowing cocoon. The movie has nothing to do with Dead Space, other than the name, and it's not good, but I felt I had to add it here.
Dead Space.
Thank you all so much for watching me explain the Dead Space Iceberg. I've been working really hard on it for a while, and now that it's done, I can finally share it with everyone. If you liked the video, be sure to stick around as there's more things like this to come, as well as stream highlights. Any kind of support is very much appreciated. If you want to keep up with me, you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch, the links are down below. I mostly stream on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at around 7 or 8 PM EST, as well as sometimes having guerrilla streams. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time!